All right, good morning. Welcome. So today we're going to be talking about walking on waters. Yes, with an S, I know. So start off, when we think about the ocean, what do we think about? Yes, this is going to be a very interactive class, so I will ask that you all participate. I'll ask many questions, but I ask that you also wait for the microphone to come to you because we are broadcasting this over Facebook, and we would like those who are watching on Facebook to be able to hear your responses as well. So, why are we drawn to the ocean? There's no right or wrong answer. Just curious about what people say.
I think there's something about the ebb and flow of the water.
Okay.
When the ocean's calm, it's really quite relaxing. You just kind of, you go there and you can hear the waves, on the beach, and it's sort of a calm, as long as there's not like a big storm coming, it's nice.
Right. So an interesting fact is that about 40% of all of Earth's population lives on within 100 kilometers of the coast. And that's quite a bit of people if you think about, how much land that there is for us to populate, that a good majority of them are near the ocean. The largest thriving developed cities are usually along the coast. Your LA, New York, Florida, So what does the Bible tell us about the ocean? Just from anything that you could remember, as far as what the Bible mentions when it's talking about oceans. Anybody?
The thing I remember most is in the Psalms when it talks about how the waves honor and glorify God, worship God, and just kind of that idea of God's power being made manifest in the oceans. That's what comes to my mind.
Right. That was a big one. What about its power that the ocean has? How many ships are lost out that get sunk just because of the waves? I think one of the other things that draw us to the ocean is the fact that we don't really know much about it. There is estimated that there's only 5% of the ocean that has ever been explored. So there's a lot of mystery that comes with the ocean. And when you think about that the ocean is something that God has created, how much of a mystery is God to us? Everything that we know about God is only a fraction of who God really is. So today's lesson is taken from Matthew chapter 14, and we're going to start at verse 22. Immediately, he made his disciples get on the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now, before we jump in, what do we know? Do we recall why the crowds were around Jesus at that time? Or what miracle he had just performed? Yes, John.
Hadn't he just fed them?
That is correct. So Jesus had just fed 5,000 men, and that's not even counting the women and the children. So Jesus was done teaching and working with these crowds of people, and rather than having his disciples help send the crowds on their way, he tells his disciples to go on the boat and go ahead of him, and he would take care of all these people by himself. And he does. And they move forward. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way away from land, beaten by the waves, for the winds was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, when he came to them walking on the sea, but then his disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, and they said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." Just this part alone, does this remind you of another story? A boat in the water, disciples being afraid. Well, the previous story in Matthew chapter 8 was Jesus was sleeping on the boat. And they were afraid when the winds and waves were beating against them. And the boat was nearly about to go down. So, when is the fourth watch? Do we know when the fourth watch is? Around what time frame? So the fourth watch is said to be between the hours of 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., which is usually the darkest time at night before sunrise. How about, do we know how far away the boat was from land? Well, in John's recording of this event, he said that they were about 25 to 30 furlongs away from the land, which roughly comes out to be about between 3 and 4.5 miles. So the disciples had traveled in the boat all night only to go between 3 and 4 miles. And then Jesus decides to just walk to them. So can we understand potentially why they may be afraid? Do we have any thoughts on why they didn't recognize Jesus?
Well, I mean, just imagine you're at night. It's really dark, and I think one account says they were, working the oars and straining at it because the wind was against them. And you look up and see this figure walking on the water. That is not something you expect to see, and so of course they thought it was some kind of ghost. You got to get, for me at least, I got to get pretty close to someone before I can tell who it is, And so, yeah, you don't expect to see that, and probably maybe they thought the fact that they were seeing ghosts, maybe they thought that meant they were going to die soon. Who knows?
Exactly. So Jesus calls out to them and he says, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Now, it's possible that they recognized Jesus' voice, but over the oceans and the waves and the fact that Jesus wasn't close enough for them to physically identify him by their sight, I'm not so sure that they may have recognized Jesus just by the sound of his voice. You know, when he said, "Take heart, it is I," the translation is the equivalent of what God said to Moses when he said, "I am." So that is how Jesus identified himself to his disciples, as "I am." So that's why he told them not to be afraid. And of course, the translation comes from the Strong's Biblical Dictionary. And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and he began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Is anything interesting come out about this particular conversation that Peter had with Jesus? Anything stand out to you? For me, I found it interesting that Peter told Jesus to command me to come out on the water. I don't know, maybe you've heard the story so many times that doesn't. But to me, that was something that stood out to me. It was the fact that Peter told God to command him to come out on the water rather than just jumping out on his own. Yes, John.
I've always kind of been struck by this because, Peter's kind of trusting the person to really be Jesus. I mean, what if it had been someone else and they were just kind of fooling and they were just saying, "Hey, yeah, Peter, come on out," And let's not forget that while we kind of poke fun at Peter for sinking, there are still 11 other guys that were afraid to even get out of the boat.
Exactly. And how far did Peter walk on the water? We don't know exactly, but we know that they weren't close enough to recognize Jesus by his face. So Peter walked all the way out to where Jesus was. So I don't know if that was 10 feet, 20 feet, but however long the distance was, you got to remember that Peter actually walked out on the water all the way to Jesus before we start poking fun at the fact that Peter did sink, the fact that he did become afraid while out there on the waters. We're just waiting for the...
The reason he quit walking on the water is because he lost faith in what he was doing. He realized he was walking on water and he didn't think he should be able to do that.
I think that there's some variation of his faith diminishing when he saw all the winds and all the waves coming and going all around him. Because remember, the ocean is still just as violent for them. That boat hasn't really moved. And the rest of the 11 apostles that are on the boat are fighting against the winds and the waves. So now you got Peter, who trusted in Jesus to step out on the water and walk all the way to him before he actually looked around and that fear factor kicked in for him.
I was doing that because I wasn't sure if you wanted another comment or not. But, you know, what I see happening to Peter is a lot of times what happens to us, and that is, you know, we might step out on faith and start to do something, and then we start looking around at our circumstances, and we start thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Why this is not, you know, I'm sure for Peter it's like, this is not natural. I've sunk in the sea 1,000 times, and now I'm standing on top of it, and you know, sometimes, you know, we look around at our circumstances, and that fear begins to take hold, like Danny was commenting about.
Exactly. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And then they got on the boat, and the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So, there are a few things that, you know, I wanted us to consider from this passage regarding this event. Matthew, Mark, and John are the only ones who record this. Luke doesn't make any recordings of this event. And when you read each account of the event, they tell it from a different point of view. Matthew focuses on the fact that Jesus walked on water, Peter walked on water, and that after Jesus tells him, you know, or asks him, "Where's his faith? Why did you doubt?" They worship God. Mark's point of view is very similar to Matthew's up until the end. Mark focuses on the point that they were still baffled and overwhelmed from the previous miracle that just happened before Jesus even walked on water. That they were still trying to comprehend that. And depending on some versions of the Bible that you read, it actually says that their hearts were hardened. And not in a sinful way, but just in the fact that they couldn't grasp the fact that Jesus had just fed 5,000 men plus women and children from a couple of fish and loaves of bread. And you know, that kind of stuck with me for a moment, because I was hung up on the fact that it said they hardened their hearts because of this particular event that they were just comprehending. And then Matthew's point of view was that after Jesus got on the boat, that they worshiped him. So I don't know. It sat with me for a while thinking, how can we worship Jesus earnestly and fully and yet still be hardened trying to just understand God's ways and things that God does? And of course, if you go over to the book of John, his recording is very short. This passage was 11, 12 verses. John's recording is only 6. And all he talks about is the fact that Jesus walked on water. He doesn't even mention the fact that Peter called out to him and Peter stepping out on the water. All John says is that Jesus walked on water. They were afraid. Jesus got on the boat, and they ended up in their location where they were heading. So there's 3 different viewpoints on one particular event that they all experienced together at the same time. For me, that was just very interesting to see. You know, a lot of people think that the Bible may contradict itself because not everybody is saying the exact same thing, but not everybody focuses on the same thing in the same event. So I just wanted to point that out because for me, I was stuck for quite a bit trying to work through this. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, and part of it depends on what the gospel writer, whatever gospel writer it is trying to highlight. Like in Mark and Luke, or I guess not Luke, but Mark and Matthew, they're more trying to just show who all Jesus is, especially Mark to Greek people, and just show. And so showing Peter walking on the water shows that Jesus is also a God that cares for you, unlike the Greek gods. What John is trying to highlight is just that this is the Messiah, period. So for a Jewish person, it wouldn't really matter if Peter walked on the water or not. All that mattered is that Jesus walked on the water, right? So they may seem like contradictions, like you said, but we also not only have to consider the point of view, but also what message are they trying to get across with their story?
Thank you. And that's very true. Also considering the audience of who their writings are supposed to be appealing to. So then, yes, John.
It's all right.
No, go ahead. Go, please. We got plenty
I
of time.
don't want to feel like I'm, slowing the class down, but, you see this in a court trial. They'll bring up different witnesses to, talk about what happened, and you'll discover that they all see something a little different. Some people will say it was a white truck, and other people will say it was a silver truck, and sometimes you'll see little differences. Now, that doesn't mean the event did not happen. It just means that different people, like you said, are highlighting different things. And so that's not really, in my book, that's not a contradiction.
So then, looking at this particular story, what do we take away from it? Why was this story written for us to learn and understand? And if we do learn and understand from it, what are we taking away from this? I mean, again, there's no wrong answers because this is just what you are taking away from this story.
One thing I like to always look at, I have it written in my notes in my Bible, but comparing this with the account in Matthew 8, when Jesus calmed the storm. Whenever Jesus calmed the storm there, they say, who is this man that can calm the storm, right? And he actually asks them the same question, why do you have so little faith? Why do you doubt? And this one, after Jesus gets in the boat, after picking up Peter, they just immediately say, this is the Son of God. So it's really cool to see their growth from early in his ministry saying, who on earth is this? To now saying, we know exactly who this is. And maybe we still don't trust in him like we should, but we at least know who he is.
Right, and if we look back at what Jesus actually says on both accounts, the first time in Matthew chapter 8, he says, where is your faith? So it's almost as if he's acknowledging the fact that they don't have any faith. And this time, Jesus says, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" So there is, as you said, a growth just between the first incident on the boat compared to this one.
I think that by looking at the three different versions of it, we can look at ourselves and see the limitations that we have of our own minds and place ourselves in each situation and see what the author is trying to point out and strengthen our own minds, because we are just as limited as the apostles, or the apostles were at that time, the disciples. And we are still very limited, and we will have moments of strength and moments of weakness.
Hey, just thinking about what you said about command, and I know there's different words in different versions, but that stuck with me as you brought that out. And you talked about the fact later in the verses there where, Jesus says, "Why did you doubt?" We see that in the beginning with Peter. If it's you, just doubt. We talk about this being a choice, the life that we live, surrendering to the service of our Father and our God, but yet he's asking to be commanded to do something. So all those things play in my mind. Even if I'm commanded to do something, I'm not going to be free of all of the distractions and things around me that would cause me to fail or err. This is what I'm seeing in my takeaway from this. Even though he's an apostle, as our brother just said, gives me hope that because I can be distracted, I can lose sight of what I have in him. It's not over for me. So when I look at this, again, I'm given encouragement by the fact, that I can attempt to follow and grow as time goes on, and that he blessed me with to mature in him. But like you said, there's 11 others on this boat that didn't even ask to be commanded. So there's a start there, even though there's doubt in the beginning. So this is what's running through my mind as I look at this passage.
I'm impressed about how he says that he's walking towards the disciples and that he says, "Come." And a lot of times when we have our come to Jesus moment, we think, I came to him. But he's always the one who takes that first step and comes towards us and shows us who he is in his humility. And then we get to know him on our journey each day that we follow that out in our own lives.
Any other things that you might take away from this? Well, I have a few. First thing I thought about is before we were to embark on waters, before going any further, what would waters for us be? I mean, because we're not, especially here in El Paso, we're not jumping on a boat and going across any kind of water. I mean, you can step over a puddle if you see it on the ground, let alone get on a boat. So what would waters represent for us today? I'm sorry? Trouble. Okay. A journey. Okay. So if we are going to embark on a journey, and we know that this journey is going to take us through some uncertain times, we need to ask God for permission. I mean, in everything that we do, we need to be in constant communication with God. That was my first takeaway. Second is, Jesus is calling to us, as you mentioned earlier, Mara, that Jesus is calling us to step out of our supposed comfort. Because even in the boat, they weren't really comfortable. They're still fighting against the same winds and the same waves that are crashing down on them. And before we become a child of God, we, out there in the world, we're fighting against the same troubles and trials and tribulations. So the difference is now we have Jesus calling out to us, and we know this. So, what is Jesus calling you out to do? And this may be a rhetorical question, and I'm going to use you, Paul, for example, as you know you're going over to Mexico pretty soon, you and your wife, and there's some uncertainty, but yet at the same time you've also been studying and preparing yourself for this. So maybe going over into Mexico itself is not actually the trying times of the waters that you're going to face. So how are you going to step out even further outside of your comfort zone? And that's just not for you. That's for all of us. You know, we get comfortable of doing our set little things that we do to worship and praise God and to do the work that we believe he's calling us to do. But are you stepping out? Are you stepping out of the boat, out of your comfort, onto the uncertainty, into the unknown, the big, great mystery? You know, my next takeaway is that, you know, if we put our trust in Jesus, then it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. I mean, if you take a look at Peter, Jesus said he had little faith, and he was still able to walk on water. What do we know about faith? That's right. We're told that if we have just faith enough to make a little mustard seed, that we're able to move mountains. So how much faith are we putting in Jesus? You know, we sing a song that Jesus is our firm foundation and that we can stand in him. Do we really believe that? Peter did for a few moments, to the fact that he was able to stand on water, something very unstable, something that wasn't even meant to support him. He stepped out because he had enough faith of a mustard seed. What does doubting do for us? Anything? Nobody?
Doubting diminishes the faith that we have in the God we have trusted in. It makes him smaller than he is. And when we have faith, there is an increase.
I like that. We got Paul next.
Yeah, and of course, God works sometimes despite our doubts, right? I mean, Peter probably doubted at least a little the whole time, right? But God still works through him, and there's times that we doubt, and God still works. But on top of just what you have up there and what Miss Marilyn said about like it leads to our failure, I mean, it also can have very if I could use the word practical, like physical ailment. I mean, you can having doubts and not trusting in God leads to worry, which can lead to anxiety, ulcers, all kinds of other things. So honestly, even as hard as it is, it's actually way harder to hold on to our doubts, because on top of your spiritual ailments that have come, you can potentially even have physical ailments with it as well.
I was going to say that, as we're saying, doubt leads to worry. It also leads to us trying to take things into our own hands when we doubt that whatever we're trusting in is not suitable or sufficient. But with all that said, we see the doubting of Peter. We see the doubting in our own lives. And as you stated, God still works within that doubt, where we can see that he has brought us through this situation and whatever it is we're dealing with. As we see with Peter later in life, as we read from this experience, right? He was able to learn from this experience and apply it in his life and do greater things to stand more firmly in Christ. Same with us. We go through situations in life. We have experiences. We have no hope in our own mind. We come to understand that God has done this completely without our help. And it helps us, if we learn from those experiences, to trust more fully in him and to stand more firmly.
Right, when we doubt, just
Right along with AJ is saying, I think doubt, if we are honestly seeking Christ, and there's a doubt will challenge us to seek out something, which is good, because I believe Thomas, when he doubted, he says, I want to believe, but I got to see first, and that led him to be challenged to say, I can see, I now believe. But when we have a doubt that is based on our own understanding, our human side, then we're automatically looking, like what you said up there, that'll lead to failure, because we're looking for something in a way to justify, or maybe not justify. I really didn't want to do it, so therefore I'm going to doubt anyways. But if we are healthy, honestly seeking something for God, it's going to challenge us to seek that out. And we will find out. I think the Spirit needs to lead us to figure out what that's going to be and help conquer that doubt.
exactly. To me, when I've noticed in my life, when I have doubts, the doubts are because I'm putting a limit on what God can do. I'm placing them in a box, and I can't get past the fact that, God is way bigger than me, way more powerful than anything I can imagine. And so, I try to put them in a box so that I can understand. But my understanding of God is only as limited as to what I will allow it to be. And so I challenge every one of us to think about, when we are doubting, we are putting our own constraints on who God is and what he can do. We got to let go to allow God to work in his full capacity. But as you mentioned, Paul, one thing that is great about God and about Jesus in this particular incident, our doubts doesn't stop God from doing what God is going to do. And it doesn't stop God from loving us, as demonstrated with Jesus when Peter started to doubt while on the oceans, becoming afraid of his surroundings and everything that he was experiencing. Jesus quickly reached out his hand and picks him up And he doesn't just picks him up and sends him on his way. He led him back to the boat. So God is still going to be with us, even though he's calling us out to step out on faith, to do his works, that he's not going to leave us alone and just let us figure it out for ourselves. He's right there. Even when you don't think he's right there, he's right there. So those are my takeaways from this particular lesson and what I wanted to share. Do we have any other comments or any questions? Yes.
Well, I was going to say, sometimes when we doubt, it's not that we doubt that God can do it, work with us, but we're like, you know, does God see me as worthy enough, or would there be a point where he would stop wanting to work with me?
I want to say thank you, because you really prepared yourself today, and I think God is using you this morning, and he is in my life. And I just want to say that sometimes I get emotional, it's okay. That when you're a believer and you're in the body of believers, like at a moment like this, you have that freedom to share who Christ is to you and who it might be at some point for somebody else. And when you're in the world, you don't have that a lot of times. So to me, this morning is very precious, and I just wanted to say thanks.
I appreciate that. All right, well, if there's nothing else, we're going to dismiss with a prayer. Our kind and righteous Heavenly Father, we come to you with humbled hearts and amazed of who you are, and humble ourselves before your might and your power. And God, we just thank you for being who you are, being the loving and merciful God who's willing to take us in your arms, that all you require is for us to reach out for you, and you're there to hold us. And Father, we just ask that as we go about our lives, as we work through the things that we face, that we put our trust in you and who you are, and we don't try to contain you in a box to control you or to control our situations, but we just allow you to be who you are, to be the loving Father, to protect us and keep us firm regardless of the situations that we come across and the things that troubles other people out in the world. But you tell us not to worry because you have control of it. And we ask, Father, that you help us in our unbeliefs, in our times of doubt, that we can just continue to put our faith and our trust into you. And we ask this all in your Son's name and give thanks. Amen.